Oh, good morning, everyone. It is good to be here. I will say, when Dr. Nina asked me and Valerie asked me to come and speak to this crowd, I knew the only answer I could give was yes, of course. They are powerful women, and I'm grateful for this invitation. I got to be honest. As a faculty member here, you don't often get to hear your colleagues teach, because you do your own thing, and you don't often get to hear them preach either. But this past weekend, Warren preached the baccalaureate service and did an amazing job. I mean, he really did. So thank you. And then he just gave this amazing lecture. And I'm asking, why am I here? What am I going to do? So I hope I have something to share. Now, I know I have something to share because...
You are.
Well, thank you. Because we all have something to share. And I will tell you now, my orientation, the work I'm going to talk about is about food. And I know that we're doing a lot of conversation around climate. And I want to be clear, there are, of course, direct connections. Many of the challenges that we're going to see because of climate change are going to affect the ways that we eat. And I want to be clear, it's going to affect who has access to food. The unfortunate reality about climate change is those who created the most of the problem are not going to be the ones who bear the greatest burden. There's going to always be an asymmetry in this. The whole work that Dr. Smith just talked to us about is this idea of reconciling, of making right relations that have been broken, that fall apart. And they continue to fall apart. But we know that through Christ living, dying, and resurrecting, through the power of God, there can be something different. So I want to spend some time thinking about how that can be different as it relates to food. I raise the morsel of bread, the host. Looking into expectant eyes, I state the body of Christ, broken for you. Laying the crumbly bread into the bold-shaped hands, I smile. And for a brief moment, our hands touch. Then almost reflexively, the recipient scoops the morsel of bread into their mouth to receive the bread of life. We share in the charity of Christ. Now, even before I was ordained as a deacon in the Episcopal Church, I had borne the body of Christ, that sacred bite, to hungry folks many times. As the paten is an empty vessel to carry the spiritual meal, we who serve God in this meal or any food ministry are here as vessels of God's strength. We who serve God in this meal or any food ministry are here as God's vessels. We are vessels of God's enough. I know we frequently talk about God's abundance, but I want to reframe this idea and simply state that God's adequacy, God's sufficiency, God's abundance is for us God's enough. Now, I want to return to this idea of God's enough later. Serving communion, the Eucharist, informs my notion of food ministry. And growing up in a Black Baptist church founded my understanding of ministry through food. Repasses after funerals, breakfasts after Easter sunrise services, potlucks after a big Sunday service, family and friends service are all expressions of love to one another and are foretastes of the great banquet. We delight in God's sufficiency collectively, even if some of us didn't have enough individually. Leftover foil-tinted plates may have helped a member, especially a senior saint, stretch the dwindling food stores until the next month's check for charity.
Yeah.
These communal meals were important ways to support one another and others beyond the church and accessing food. I could not have imagined that those early and sustained experiences with food in the church would inform my professional experience. As an agricultural economist, I found few ways to connect these ideas with my secular work until a friend, Martha Hink, she was the executive director of the Food Bank of East Alabama, asked me to join the food bank there in Auburn. Serving on the board gave me insights into the challenges of food security locally and even nationally. I worked with members representing vastly different aspects of society, business, ecclesial, governmental, and civil society leaders. All of us worked together to support the food bank and to meet the needs of as many folks as possible. Of course, we were not so naive to think that the food bank's work alone would eliminate food insecurity or hunger. I wonder, though, if in the busyness of trying to make the food bank work, had we lost some of the focus from the larger problem, paying too much on the immediate need. Nevertheless, my participation on the board sparked a new focus and research and engagement. Now today at the Divinity School, I teach a class on the charitable food sector. We push each other, learners and instructor, to think critically of the good work of giving food to people in need. We interrogate established institutions and individual actions with an eye toward constructive, practical ways to address the charity and justice gap in the emergency food sector, that is, food banks, food pantries, soup kitchens, and the like. Deeply embedded in my religious traditions is a call deeply embedded in many religious traditions is a call for the care of the poor, offering charity to those in need. Now, that charity is frequently the work of justice, addressing the misalignment of ideals of a free society with the realized experience of those in need. Further, many of us in the Christian tradition feel compelled to serve God unawares. See Hebrews 13:2, by feeding the hungry, caring for the stranger, visiting the prisoner. Thus, a duty to serve is integral to the identity of the Christian. But those of us involved in charity work must think through what we are doing and what is our motivation. When week after week, or month after month, we see the same people cycling through our food pantry. Or those individuals tend not to look like our community. We have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? Janet Poppendieck argued in the book Sweet Charity, the early creators of the charitable food sector saw it as emergency relief. But what happens when emergency is not just temporary, but it's chronic? The food that we are giving, is not solving the root problem that keeps folks returning to our pantries. So why do we give? Are we serving others for their own good or ours? How do we demark the other? Who is in and who is out? Is our notion of caring for people who experience food insecurity too limited, meeting an immediate need at best? Or worse, are we perpetuating an injustice? Now, brothers and sisters, siblings, I can't answer all these questions today. I hope, however, to promote reflection on them. Before getting into the murky waters of charity versus justice, let's begin with a case of immediate need. When a person who is on the verge of immediate need, there are not often discussions of justice. Justice will come later. In this setting, I am reminded of Elijah when he was on the lam and hungry. 1 Kings 17 goes, Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord the God of Israel lives before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except my word. Yeah. The word of the Lord came to him saying, Go from here and turn eastward and hide yourself in the Wadi Sereth, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the wadi, and I commanded the ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and lived in the Wadi Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the wadi. But after a while, the wadi dried up, because there was no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and live there, for I have commanded a widow. Yeah. A widow there to feed you. Now upon encountering the widow, she says to Elijah, As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked. Only a handful of meal in a jar, a little oil in a jug, and now I'm gathering a couple of sticks so I may go home and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. Those words are haunting. This woman has nothing and is staring into the dark abyss of hunger, even death. The environment has collapsed around her because of the drought. The remnants of food are nearly expended. She has nowhere to turn. And then this stranger asks for food. Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. At this point in the narrative, Elijah has not become the man who defeats Ahab and Jezebel's prophets. He has not ridden a chariot of fire into the afterlife. While he boldly predicted the drought, speaking truth to power, Elijah is by all accounts, a fanatical enemy of the state, predicting destitution to the land. And God sends Elijah from Israel and promises to feed him. He will have enough. You see, God's enough is our abundance. To be clear, I am not suggesting roasted pheasants with brioche bread pudding. No. The Old Testament version of Grubhub or Uber Eats, like manna, is provided regularly, consistently, and most importantly, miraculously, by God's drones. In this case, the ravens. So it was enough food to meet his needs. But the mere presence of this food is an overflowing of blessing in a dry and soon to be drier, weary land. God shows his great hospitality through creation, the one that we're to care for. So God's enough is abundance. Then the water dries up. The ravens stop coming. During the height of the pandemic, many folks were wondering how would they make it. I had the opportunity to work with a colleague at Tufts, and we were doing interviews of people who were using these little micro food pantries, kind of like the little free libraries. And we were talking to them about their experience and trying to understand how we were managing. So in these my colleagues and I listened to the struggles of folks about access to food. And one mother with a child told us, quote, "I definitely do worry about getting enough food. I can't get around to the big food pantries. Before the pandemic, I still worried. I still had my days sometimes where I didn't have much. I didn't worry as much. I also had a car then. I also had a job, and things weren't so bad." End quote. Now, how many of you have had what you believe was just enough and even that went away? Did you begin gathering sticks, preparing to die? What did you do? What did you say? But I see you, and you're here. You are here, and I am here by God's grace. And just as the God who brought us to this moment, God spoke to Elijah and said, "Go now to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and live there, for I have commanded a widow there to feed you." We do not know about Elijah's state of mind. However, I can only imagine the fear Elijah felt immigrating to a foreign land, or the shame of asking a lowly widow for food. Siblings, how hard is it for us to acknowledge our need and dependence on others? Even in the best of times, Elijah was in a precarious position. A stranger in a strange land with nothing to offer but voices in his head of a drought. Arriving in the city, he finds a woman gathering sticks. How does he know that she is a widow? Yeah. Or the widow? I don't know. Maybe it was her dress. Maybe it was his depression. He calls out and says, "Bring me a swallow of water." And she turns to retrieve the water. He shouts out, "Bring me a piece of bread." Elijah is bold, or desperate, or inspired. In our eyes, this woman owed Elijah nothing. He was not kin. He was an alien and potentially dangerous. Yet this widow is part of God's miraculous visioning as she gives Elijah her last morsel. She gives out of herself, not with the expectation of more, but more is to come. Above her own need, above the needs even of her son, she offers hospitality. Radical, risky hospitality. By my modern eyes, I see this type of self-sacrifice as radical and risky. The extension of hospitality by the widow seems outlandish, even dangerous. But maybe this is what true hospitality is. According to our colleague Dr. Ellen Davis here at Duke Divinity, hospitality was life or death in the ancient Near Eastern culture. Through extending this hospitality across difference was still difficult. And this, beloved, is what this nameless woman does. Elijah was in need, as was the widow. Through hospitality, we see community and an echo of communion in simple constituents of broken bread between broken people, hoping for and longing for more. Yet, we see a miracle amid this brokenness, a gift of God's enough, which is abundance of meal and oil. We see another example of radical, risky hospitality in the first century church. Consider Acts 2. A Pentecostal wind has blown through the community, availing the hearts of many to a strange, new, but old message to repent and be baptized. These new believers, quote, would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. These believers were selling off their surplus to get to God's enough, which is always abundance. Day by day, as they spent much of their time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all people. These biblical narratives push up against debates that have been going on in the charitable food space. The central issue that I have raised earlier at the heart of this debate is that some suggest that we should move beyond charity to fight for justice in the charitable food space. If food is not the solution to food insecurity, but economic security, then we are failing to help folks in need by passing out canned goods. However, the story of Elijah and the widow points the idea that hospitality between two needy people offers a new way of considering food ministry. By redefining the charity of charitable foods to hospitality, we may avoid the false dichotomy of charity versus justice. Because justice without charity is brutal. And charity without justice is exploitative, which is the critique of those who argue against the charitable food sector. So what can we learn about hospitality that can help us do food ministry better? According to Letty Russell, the author of Just Hospitality, Christian hospitality is, quote, the practice of God's welcome by reaching across difference to participate in God's action, bringing justice and healing to our world in crisis. Recently, authors and theologians have revitalized the study of hospitality, investigating its practice amongst persons of faith and their communities. In her text, Making Room, Recovering Hospitality as a Christian Tradition, Christine Paul draws from the Christian scriptures and tradition to demonstrate the way in which public and private contexts are intertwined through the practice of hospitality. The practice of hospitality serves to redefine relationships and create mutual empowerment despite asymmetry, transforming charitable interactions between giver and receiver into hospitable interactions between host and guest. Now, it's always dangerous to talk about early Christianity when Warren's in the room, but I'm going to try for a moment. For the early church, the practice of hospitality was associated with the Roman patronage system. By exchanging gifts and service, the patron and client would build on another's honor and boost the social standing of the patron. However, this scripture, according to Joshua Jiff, who wrote Saved by Faith and Hospitality, said that this relationship perpetuated class divisions and persisted for the benefit of the patron. It did not ultimately empower or elevate the status of the client. Within this system of patron, the host had the upper hand, the higher social status, and could determine limits of their giving. The host could establish boundaries, set conditions, and ensure that the roles of the host and guest remain firmly established. I'm here, you're there. If a host enters a hospitable relationship with their own benefit in mind, they essentially hesitate to take risks and to extend true welcome, choosing instead to preserve their own safety and security. While the host should not use their social power against the guest, they must reckon with this existing asymmetry. It exists. In Russell's Just Hospitality, this idea of the host-guest interplay is framed in terms of overcoming an imbalanced power quotient. When a host is attuned to their own social location, power, and privileges, they should consider the difference between their position and the position of their guest. You see, the comment about pride reigns clear here. With this knowledge, they should act hospitably, attempting to balance the power quotient by treating the guest as their equal. Similarly, when a host extends true unconditional hospitality, their guest should not feel obligated to express gratitude or to provide some kind of gift in return. While charitable interactions can lead to disempowerment or patronization, as in the gift of others, Andrew Shepard puts it this way: the Christian vision of hospitable relationships moves the core idea at hand from being there for others to being there with others. Ideally, the hospitable relationship is one of true mutuality. Both parties approach the exchange with the hope of relational connection and shared benefit, entering, as Richard Kinney and Melissa Fitzpatrick said in their book Radical Hospitality, a two-way street where we all are others to each other and always strangers to ourselves. If the host chooses an approach that prioritizes mutuality, however, do they assume a kind of risk, like the widow of Elijah? While hostile or conditional hospitality results in boundaries, limits, and fear, true and unconditional hospitality leads to gifts without expectation of reciprocity or return. I give because you are. With this posture, the host acknowledges the unknown nature of their venture, as Kearney and Fitzpatrick state, quote, leaping into the unanticipated letting go of what can be and cannot be controlled. Moreover, by relinquishing self-concern and untethering from personal desires or hopes, Michael Crom, in his text Justice and Charity, argues the host recognizes their good is intertwined with the good of the other. Thus, when a host opens their home or extends material goods to a guest, they do so both without knowledge of the outcome and with no attachment to any kind of return. As Shepard and Fitzpatrick and Kearney argue, the gift of exchange operates within a sacred economy, a space of grace, sufficiency, and generosity. This space only exists in a reconciled world. Unlike the unequal, power-imbalanced relationships of the ancient Roman patronage system, Kearney and Fitzpatrick note unconditional hospitality rests upon a symmetry of asymmetry. Both members or groups in the exchange will likely recognize that one person possesses more resources than the other or has greater social standing than the other. Nevertheless, the asymmetry does not entail inferiority. As in the Trinitarian relations, distinction and difference do not exclude the possibility of unity and genuine communion, as suggested by Shepherd. Motivated by generosity and in pursuit of the common good, the parties can participate in asymmetrical mutual gift exchange. Even if the guest does not have material goods to offer or to enter into the exchange. The practice of unconditional hospitality is not a one-way imposition of power or will, but a two-way exchange, an acknowledgement of reconciliation across separation. Exploring the ideas of hospitality suggests that we can enter into these relationships in affirming ways, in ways that lead to justice. We engage in hospitality because God has been and continues to be hospitable to us. However, Russell argues that justice and hospitality, or just hospitality, is more complex. Christian hospitality is more than a cheery smile from a sunshine lady. It includes providing food, clothing, and shelter to the homeless and welcoming strangers into our sanctuaries. It also includes actions of genuine solidarity with those who are different from us. It goes beyond caring for the other to enabling them to care for themselves and others. In short, true hospitality is justice seeking. Maybe our charitable giving is not hospitable if we are not building capacity in the recipients of our gifts. Now, how are we building capacity in our food ministries? The paradoxical solution to food insecurity in the U.S. is it's not about food. Rather, families with concerns or limited access to food need financial resources and economic opportunities to provide for themselves. Consider two of the 10 statements that the U.S. government uses to evaluate food insecurity or hunger. 1, we worried whether my or our food would run out before I or we got money to buy food. The food that I bought or that we bought just didn't last, and I or we didn't have enough money to get more. These statements focus our concerns or on concerns about accessing food because of financial resources and assert that food access would not be a problem simply if people had enough money. Without a doubt, folks without financial means cannot support their families' needs for food. Through economic opportunities or social support, individuals can access resources to obtain food. Federally, we provide this support through programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or formerly the Food Stamp Program, or the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, or WIC. It is our ability to feed ourselves more than just our ability or capacity to purchase food. Our families, social location, culture, and identity shape our foodways. Resources such as time, health, and capacity are necessary to feed ourselves. Reducing the solution to food insecurity to financial or charitable transactions fails to acknowledge the complexity of the food system and the human and ecological systems that support it. While the challenges of food insecurity can be considered an inefficiency from a technocratic viewpoint, fundamentally, food insecurity and more broadly, challenges of the food system are justice concerns. As a result, we need a food justice lens. In their text, Cultivating Food Justice, Alison Hope Alcon and Julian Algerman describe food justice as a broad construct that scholars and activists use to describe an ideal food system. But there are many voices in this conversation. Some voices argue for food justice where everyone has access to foods they need that are culturally relevant and environmentally sustainable. Others demand a decorporatization of the food system with an orientation towards local foods, while some long for agrarianism that supports small producers using traditional techniques. Different groups believe that a technologically advanced and efficient food system will yield an adequate food supply for the most people possible. The distinctions and categorizations suggested here are imperfect. We can find people who hold different assortments of these ideas and others to define what true food justice should be. The larger point is that we do hold different concepts of food justice, and we need an informed discourse on these ideas of justice for the food system. Implicit in all of these definitions are suggestions that individuals can afford food produced in a just food system, but we need to make building this capacity explicit. In my research and teaching, I hope to engage students, faculty, community members, businesses, and policymakers in productive conversations to develop a more complete and better understanding of a just food system. Admittedly, some of these ideas of justice are in conflict. In reality, ideas of food justice highlight political and cultural perceptions of justice and rights on which we have not achieved consensus. Navigating these challenges means that a just food system like food insecurity is not simply about food. I'm not the first to argue that food is political. It is also cultural. Concepts of food and the food system reflect and refract our deepest values and ideals. Thus, we need multiple voices to have meaningful conversations on food in our society. We need to explore the resources in our community that can affect change politically, economically, and socially. Just food does not just happen. Growing up, my parents had a garden. I hate cutting okra. I'm getting there. I remember the green hue of my fingers after shelling peas. You read my mind. Crookneck squash, which I thought was the only squash that existed, and tomatoes for frying when green or eating directly once red were abundant and flavorful. I always loved collards, mustards, and turnip greens, a different trinity that this garden produced over the year. And my mama cooked to perfection. And now, deep into their retirement, my parents maintained this garden. The mix of food said, well, it's changed. But staples are still there. My parents have always shared the bounty of that garden with family and neighbors. The example of my parents and their garden, their hospitality. The takeout meals after church repasses and the morsel of bread of communion are manifestations of the grace of the Holy Parent. And they're enough. Despite the real scarcity that we create, and we do create scarcity, we have these experiences that show that abundance exists if only we can see it. If only we can remove the obstacles so that all can share in this abundance. The work of food justice that I hope occurs in your community will move us to experience God's grace and God's reconciliation. As we taste and see this abundance, we will know that it is too good for ourselves alone. And like my parents in their garden, we will share in the abundance of truly just food. Thank you.
Amen.